Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish Prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.
Hi folks, and welcome back to Through a Scottish Prism. Hope you and yours are well. Sunday the 1st of December, the years fly in, and it's been quite a year. It's been quite a week, lots to talk about and not a lot of time to do it in. So let's get the troops in right away. We've got over there in Edinburgh, Lloyd Quinnan. Lloyd, hi, welcome back, my friend.
Good to be back, Roddy. Nice to see you all.
And you. And we've got the Coatbridge Cavalier somewhere. I don't know where he is. Is he in the Brig? Is he in Brussels? Is he in America? Where are you?
Yeah. Currently in Brussels, but tomorrow I'll be in the States. It's great. Well, I'm dead lucky, man. Going to Italy as well, and Germany, and I'm wandering about all over the planet. It's cracking. And the place in Italy is the place where they make Prosecco, which is kind of wasted on me because I'm more into my reds. But there you go. Yeah. What can you do?
I did ask you where you were. I didn't ask you where you were going.
Where are we all going, man? Hey, there's no embracing a grave, so you might as well enjoy it while you're here.
Well, in the Prosecco land, you could be using it. It could come to your advantage.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll talk about that later. And of course, we have our favourite lawyer up there in Clickmanning, our Eva. Eva, how are you, my friend?
Good, Roddy, but a wee bit upset that you reminded me it's December because naturally the Christmas shopping has not started yet, and don't tell me how many shopping days are left because I don't want to know.
Well, apparently my wife's buying me a set of luggage. I don't know what's going on there. And up there in the City of Discovery, we've got Alan Petrie. Alan, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing not too bad. I mean, after the recording here, I've got to run away and get my hearing test done. And no, it's not because I'm getting old. That's because I used to work with live machinery.
You shouldn't have told us that. The whole show now we're going to be doing that. Did you hear that, Alan? Did you hear that? Okay. That's the last of the hilarity because we've got a lot of serious things to talk about, folks. Just want a quick talk on, of course, yesterday where there was the memorial for Scotland's greatest ever politician, I would suggest. Alex Salmond up in the Royal Mile here at Sir Giles Cathedral. But outside, a favourite of this show, our wee Annie, was outside there whipping up the crowd into a frenzy. Her and people like Valeria MacLeod were outside and there was a good crowd and it was great to see. I really am so happy that so many people turned up to pay their respects. You were in Edinburgh. Did you feel any atmosphere, Lloyd?
There was definitely a sense of something was happening. I couldn't manage to make it up myself, but my wife came past and said that it was quite extraordinary the way the tourists all got kind of caught up in things, and there was a lot of love for Alex Salmond in the streets of Edinburgh yesterday, and that's a good thing.
Yeah. Phil, you were invited, but you were unable to attend.
I really wanted to go, but unfortunately work made the final decision. I was a wee bit unsure. I would have bitten my tongue out of respect for Alex. Had I been there, I was supposed to tie up with Angus Brendan and a few other troops that I know from the past, obviously, and from the cause that we have all fought so hard and long for. But as I said, work tied me up. I'm off to the States tomorrow. I've got too much to do. I felt I loved to see it, and it was a good send-off. Not as much as the funeral. The funeral, I think, was genuine. The people on the street were genuine, and I'm not saying that there wasn't a lot of genuine warmth and positivity about this, but it was more contrived. It was staged, as it had to be, because it's a commemoration of the great man's great life and what he stood for and what he believed in. And I'm a wee bit of a quandary in so much as that I think this is a unifying event. The fact that there are chasms exposed or fractures within the Yes movement that were patently on show during this event is one thing. I mean, I believe, for example, Sturgeon, Swinney, Robertson, Forbes, et al. Have crossed the Rubicon. And within the SNP and what the SNP have done just now, for me, it's irrecoverable. Now, does that mean it will always be the case? I hope not. I don't think so, because of the principles that we all believe. But for me, there was a feel for me that there was a lot of great news. There was a lot of good people there, and people I would be happy to spend time with. But there was also people there who it would have been wrong for me to say what I really think, and I didn't trust myself not to be honest. So there's a wee bit of, well, maybe just as well, but there was lots of good people, and we should remember it was about Alex Salmond. The problem I've got is that people used it for their own stage of their own benefit, and that is always the case when you're dealing with politicians, I'm afraid. But the people were great. Wee Annie was fantastic, and there was a lot of love for a great man, and respect even from the enemies. There's people inside that church I just don't want to break bread with, to be honest, though. But
Ditto. But yeah, leave it at that. Eva, there were John McAlpine put it, Alex people outside. They certainly were outside. All of the ones outside were Alex people. Maybe not some of them inside. But it was great to see he'd got a good turnout.
I think that I agree with most of what Phil has said. And I was surprised to see some of the folk who were there. But I absolutely take my hat off to those who were lined up outside in the streets. They were Alex people, and he would have loved every minute of that, deservedly so. I thought the service was very fitting, it was very warm, and it was very, very emotional. I think particularly when Fergus Ewing recited the Wild Geese poem, and also Kenny's words, particularly about how the dream will be realised. And I think these are the sentiments that we should take away from that it was a huge event for a man who was obviously, as we've said so many times, a most massive transforming figure within Scottish politics. He's changed the lives of everybody in Scotland for good and forever. And it's incumbent on us to make sure, as Kenny said, that the dream is realised. That's what we need to do, and we need to make it happen soon. Those people outside in the streets are devoted to the cause of Scottish independence, and those people represent a small part of a massive movement, and it's one that needs to be mobilised, and it will be.
Yes, and more on that later, ladies and gentlemen. We have quite a lot to say on that matter. Alan, did you watch it on the stream? You owe me a quid, Alan.
Sorry. Yeah, I watched it, and it's unfortunately something that none of us ever wanted to see. We didn't want to see a memorial for Alec. But it was a big reminder how one individual can change the course of an entire nation. I mean, we've had the Nelson Mandelas, we had Martin Luther King Jr. I mean, Martin Luther King Jr. said, "I have a dream." Alec said, "Here is a dream, and you can make it a reality." And that's what Alec did. He brought in the confidence of the Scottish people to actually fight for what they believed in. And if you looked at the unionist faces that were there, they knew people weren't there just to mourn Alec. That was a call to arms. And the Yes movement know that we are now left to fulfil Alec's dreams. And we have to unite in order to do that.
Indeed we do. Alan, well said. And folks, as I said already, we'll have more on that later. Because we've been discussing over the last year, Lloyd, how every opinion poll that comes out, we saw it and we warned about the SNP support was falling all the time, but the independence vote was staying solid, over 50%. It's been that way. But here this week, 18-0. The SNP have lost 18 by-elections in a row in the recent past. Even although there's a bigger support for independence than ever, the SNP are slipping. But the SNP are not paying attention, are they?
No, they're not. They appear to be, well, they appear to be doing a fair impersonation of an ostrich. They seem to be putting their head right into the sand and ignoring everything that's around, which is very dangerous in this circumstance. But to me, the SNP losses are one thing, and to some degree can be expected this late in their term of governments. They've been in charge for so long now, there always comes a certain point where people just turn off. But the real lesson in here is the turnout. The turnout in these council by-elections, you know, some of them, 12%, 19%, low 20s. You know, the whole idea that people are so sickened with politics that they're not coming out in council by-elections is one thing. But the other side of it is when you actually look at the figures and you compare the figures, or you know, estimated figures of SNP membership in most of these council wards that they've lost, their membership is actually higher than the number of votes that they got. And that really should, I mean, that says to me as an ex-organizer, that says that there's no structure on the ground. Or if there is a structure on the ground, it doesn't know what it's doing. And one of the big problems, one of the really serious problems of campaigning because of this long-term SNP hegemony is the fact that they've lost the ability to campaign. You know, effectively, most of the organisers I know of the SNP at the moment are people who have never known defeat. They've also inherited situations where they were the winners. So they've never had to fight for anything. They've never actually had to campaign. And in some ways, that's what we're seeing here. The tragedy is people are not going out to vote, and they need something inspirational to get them out to vote. The most inspirational thing that there's ever happened in Scotland, certainly in my lifetime, was the referendum in 2014, where we gave people personal responsibility. We said to them, you tell us what you think. What's your opinion? Do you want to be an independent country or do you not? That responsibility brought out working people in their thousands. Mm-hmm. But we've had, effectively, we've been stuck in the mud for the past 10 years. Mm. We need to get moving. We need to get moving.
We do. On the back of this, Phil, 18 losses, which the Labour Party won most of them. Earlier in the week, I sent this to Techie. Now, you probably heard it. The UK general, someone's calling for it's not going to happen. I believe it's now over 3 million, or around about 3 million people have signed. They're fed up with the Labour Party already and they want them out. And yet, they're more fed up, it seems, with the SNP in Scotland. Although, you know, the whole British public, dare I say, are wanting this government out. I mean, what are you going to replace them with? Bring back the real Tories? I mean, a nonsense. And it won't happen. But the point is, an unpopular Labour government are beating the SNP hands down. Goodness sake, John Swinney and co waking up.
I don't think they will waken up. I think they're already aware. They're aware of this, but that is a sad indictment of where we are politically across the board in the West. This is America. This is Europe. This is UK. This is Scotland. If you sell out to the man, as all of these nations have, the corporations are running what's going on in the West. This is a bigger picture, and what we are seeing here is an SNP who have been captured, who are being controlled, and they suffer the consequences. They are led by the SNP are led by people who have sold us, we the people, out. And I say no quarter for so-called leaders who have betrayed the people, the cause. They've betrayed the cause of independence for their own self-interest. Let's be clear about that. Their own self-interest. I mean, and I disagree that they're not paying attention. They are, very closely, because their snout in the gravy, the snout in the trough on this gravy train depends on them paying attention. They are seeing the drop in support. The people are turning against them, and critically, they see the writing on the wall. And hell mend you all for this betrayal. I would wager that all SNP elected members are, or should be, looking for alternative employment, and deservedly so. Pouncing about in limos when you've not earned the right to do so, not that you should, but if it were otherwise, working tirelessly for the independence, for the cause of our people, for the benefit of our people, then you can do that with my blessing. You can take the benefits and the trappings of leadership and being having a work limo, and because you're too busy working for the freedom of people to get us out of poverty, stop that 1 in 5, reverse that trend and free the people, then you get it with my blessing. But while filling your pockets and narcissistically feeding your own id while the people suffer, to hell with them all.
I don't have a problem with that. I agree with you. The other thing is, I mean, just purely on tactics or anything else, the day after those the recent 2 losses, then the SNP announce they're going to bring back next year, not this year. So this winter we're going to lose old folk, but next year. The fact that they could have done it earlier from a political stance, never mind the moral, we should have turned around as soon as the English Labour Party said we're removing it. They should have said, no, we're not. You can, we're not. We'll mitigate it. But they're tactically, the day after the election, why not the day before the election?
I've been a walk down memory lane more than once this week, and somebody who came to mind often was a man called Robert Curran, who in his day was the youngest ever provost in Scotland. He was elected a town councillor in Alva in 1945 for the SNP. And what he used to do was he would literally walk from his home in Alva into Stirling, 7 miles there, 7 miles back, campaigning and meeting other like-minded nationalists all these years ago. Fast forward to the 1990s, as a council candidate in 1992 for the SNP, I did scratch my head and wonder why the SNP wanted to have elected members in councils. But of course, Alex Salmond, who was the leader in those days, pointed out very well indeed that the purpose of having SNP councillors was to show that SNP representatives could make competent decisions and govern competently. And it was that same line that took Alex's government from 2007 into becoming a majority government in 2011, because he created competent government, the best government that Scotland has seen in modern times. This is not what we experience today, and you would have to question not just the obvious lack of strategic nous, you would also have to ask yourself, are the SNP doing this deliberately, to quote Lord George Foulkes? Because it seems very much as if they are. Their priorities and their policy decisions have become increasingly more absurd and questionable. And one I learned about only a couple of hours ago, courtesy of a unionist I follow on Twitter, is the amount of money that Transport Scotland are paying to Sustrans, a Bristol-based company whose job is to build cycle lanes and narrow the roads and the junctions of towns and cities across Scotland. In 1 year, the budget, the payment to Sustrans is £97.9 million. It's rocketed in the last few years at exactly the time that our people are being squeezed by a fuel crisis, by rising cost of living, issues to do with obviously winter fuel payments and related matters, and yet somehow it's a greater priority for the Scottish Government to fund cycle lanes, which are used by very few people and which have caused mayhem in a number of towns and cities across the country. That budget needs reviewed overnight, similar to the issues raised and created by the Greens in the context of the deposit return scheme. There are very irresponsible people doling out enormous sums of money, mainly heading in the wrong direction because their priorities are skewed and need redrawn forthwith.
Yeah, absolutely. The cycle lane thing I find quite bizarre. I mean, here in Spain, there are lots of cyclists. I mean, yeah, lovely weather. But in Scotland, it's like, I remember the last time I stepped off the plane, the wind nearly blew me off the bloody steps. When you're cycling in that wind, the rain coming horizontally at you, that's why we don't have thousands of cyclists yet. We're spending this inordinate amount of money on cycle lanes because it's trendy. It's just ridiculous. But to get back to the point, Alan, the tactics of the SNP, not listening to what the problems are, and I'm going to come on to their biggest one in a second, but this, the day after issuing something that could have maybe helped them get a couple of extra votes, they don't seem to have a tactic, they don't seem to have a strategy, and they don't seem to have ears that listen to the public.
Yeah, it's totally true. And I mean, like I said, the main thing, it's not that the SNP are just losing votes. It's the Yes movement are not coming out and voting, and that's why the polls are so low. I mean, the unionists are not getting more votes, but the Yes movement have to start using different tactics and stop playing by the unionists' rules. If you don't have someone to vote for, go and spoil your ballot paper. Write on it, independence, nothing less. Because once the spoiled ballot papers start beating the winning candidates, and let's face it, 12% is not a lot of votes, that could be done very easily at by-elections at councils.
Good idea.
That's when they'll start taking note of exactly what's happening. But for the SNP to make announcements of retaining something after an election where they get defeated, it makes it look like Labour are winning and forcing the SNP's hands. I mean, it was the Labour Party who withdrew the winter fuel allowance in England. They've reduced the Scottish budget by the equivalent amount, but Scottish Labour put pressure on the SNP, and then all of a sudden the SNP said, oh, we'll reverse it. That makes it look like it was a Labour decision, not an SNP decision. The SNP have got to buck up their idea. Yeah, the SNP have got to buck up their ideas.
It just shows that they've got no idea, no clue, no strategy. No one's thinking strategically. It's ridiculous. But, why are they going bad? Why is it all going wrong? Now, look, if I didn't know better, I'd have believed this was nonsense now. We had a great midweek show, folks, and if you haven't watched it, you should, on legal aid and the dangers that are there for people requiring legal assistance. However, the Scottish Government have spent so much money in the Supreme Court, in the Court of Session, defending ridiculous things, but they went one better this week, Lloyd. They had a QC, the King's Counsel rather, in the Supreme Court saying that men could be pregnant and they could be lesbians. Now, there is idiocy, there's stupidity, and they wonder why people are not voting, why people are switching off, and why people will not support them. This insanity, again, is something that should not have even got this far.
No, it shouldn't have got this far. But when the beast is wounded and it's writhing about, trying desperately to stay alive, this is the kind of thing it does. We have a whole bunch of people who have committed themselves to an ideology which, most of us believe was utter and complete drivel from the beginning. But they've gone so far down the road, they have to keep going. They don't have self-awareness. They don't have the confidence to say we got it wrong. So hence, intelligent people are being asked to stand up in the court and say things that they don't believe are true, to try and argue points of law which have been effectively created by dim-witted politicians. The worst thing about all of this is there seems to be no understanding whatsoever, either in the Parliament or in the government, that these constant legal cases over issues which most people don't understand why we're even having to ask the questions, simply make our politicians and our Parliament look foolish. In fact, beyond foolish. It's it's into the world of fantasy now. And I think what I really fear is that we're going to keep seeing headlines like this as they as they gasp for their dying breath, those that have gone down this insane anti-science route, who are refusing entirely to admit they were wrong. How long is this going to keep dragging on? How many more court cases? But the biggest issue here is there's a danger. There is a real danger that if this madness has become so collective across the whole of the United Kingdom, we haven't had the result from these judges yet. What if the result comes back in support? What are we going to do then? Then the whole thing becomes an even more frightening kind of prospect than it is at the moment. But I really do believe that hopefully we're coming to the end of this anti-science nonsense. But when you have entitled, arrogant people who have committed themselves to this ideology, they are not going to give up easily. And then on the other side of it is, there is the whole industry that has built up around the whole gender recognition and equality agenda. There's people's livelihoods at stake here, and they're going to fight to the bitter end. And that's the tragedy. For instance, here's one. The Edinburgh Rape Crisis Centre that had the man who was running it, Murdo Wadwa. Murdo Wadwa's away, but the overall boss of the whole affair,
Brinkley.
Sandra Brindley, she's still in position. Now, if our country is so captured that someone who put a man in charge of a rape crisis centre is still in position, that tells me that these people are going to fight to the bitter end, and that includes, unfortunately, the Scottish Government and civil service.
Yeah. Phil, men can be lesbians and get pregnant. And according to our Foreign Secretary, they can also grow a cervix. Did you know that?
Where do you start with this one? Well, okay, at the risk of insulting everyone, I'm a lesbian locked inside a man's body. What? You know, I've gotten into trouble for that one before, but Ricky Gervais had the right of it. He didn't understand the way things have gone. You know what's wrong? Hark at these old-fashioned women complaining about progress. You know, these old-fashioned women with wombs and who can have babies. And quite jokingly, these modern women, they're the ones who have the right of it. These modern women, you know, the ones with cocks. Oh, come on, and beards. Oh, really? Just, I mean, like, it's Monty Python-esque. Look, Reg, where's the fetus going to gestate? In a box? Oh, bugger off.
It is quite ridiculous.
It's
Eva,
ridiculous.
I know that it is ridiculous. Eva, I know this is very close to your heart, but I know you were following the case, but when this went up, the flowchart, a King's Council had to put up this flowchart of how you can be gay, straight, or lesbian. I mean,
what had actually happened was that the judges were becoming completely bamboozled by the submissions made on behalf of the Scottish Government and some of the organisations that support the Scottish Government. And one of the judges said something about the definition of a lesbian, and the King's Council said that she would likely need to have a flowchart, at which point the judges then took a break for a wee while. I think they took an early lunch because it had become so utterly bizarre. But in fact, what was being said on behalf of the Scottish Government, in essence, was that if a man said he was a woman, then he was a woman. And if he had a GRC, that made him female for all purposes. And the debate developed and the submissions developed into saying that if the man who'd become female only because he had a GRC, he would be treated as female within the health service as well. And that led to arguments between people about, well, would that mean that his sex marker had changed in his health records? And yes, it would. So that a man holding a GRC that said he was female could fully expect to be invited for medical tests that only females require. But it would also mean that the man who had the GRC saying that he was female would no longer be called for the medical tests that men should get. So it was bizarre in the extreme. Another part of the submission was to the effect that a woman who had a GRC that said that she was male could no longer claim discrimination, for example, in relation to low pay because she had lost the status of being female. So the consequences were possibly unintended, but extremely wide-reaching, because the Scottish Government's line was a GRC changes your sex for all purposes. But the enormous far-reaching implications that were outlined last week in court are the utter antipathy, the complete opposite of what was said in the course of the Gender Recognition Reform Bill going through the Scottish Parliament. Because in the Scottish Parliament, Nicola Sturgeon and all those around her maintained, and Alan's pal Shona Robson particularly, said that the self-identification was a minor administrative change which really would affect a very small number of people. It would not have far-reaching implications. So what they argued a couple of years ago in Holyrood is the complete opposite of what was now being argued in the Supreme Court. However, to add insult to injury, on the day that the King's Council, instructed by the Scottish ministers, including John Swinney, on the day that she was on her feet in court saying that a man could be pregnant and a man could be a lesbian, John Swinney was asked that very question and he said, no, That wouldn't be right. A man couldn't be pregnant and a man couldn't be a lesbian. He said, you know, that was what he was asked and that was his answer. So the King's Council that we're paying thousands of pounds for was instructed to put a position in court that the First Minister doesn't actually agree with. That's where we've got to. And I'll tell you this, on legal aid, if I had a client who told me to do something and I went into court and I did that and I followed that line and I discovered that while I was doing that, my client was away giving television interviews and interviews to journalists saying that a complete opposite of what I'd been instructed to say to the sheriff, I'd be sacking my client before he had the opportunity to sack me.
Yeah, it's quite bizarre, Alan. I mean, I suppose it's I mean, maybe I should get a GRC, then I'll never need again to get a prostate examination, which is not the most pleasant thing, as the male population knows. But it's a hell of an extreme way of getting out of a prostate examination, isn't it?
Yeah, well, what I can't understand is, now, I believe that in order to get the certificate, you have to give an undertaking that you will live the life of the sex that you have chosen. Therefore, if a trans man becomes pregnant, they've surely broken that contract. A man cannot get pregnant. So they themselves have broken, and it's not something they could hide. So why are they not getting a GRC removed from them for breaking that contract? I mean, it's just ridiculous. I mean, just because you've got a dick on your head doesn't make you a man.
Well, it reminds me of that, what was that puppet thing, you know, today we're looking out the round window. It seems to be that's where we're going. But this insanity, folks, can only be stopped by one way, and that's by you, the people, mobilising and getting your act together, because these nutcases need removed. But it's not just in Scotland we've got it. Now, a big concern for me, and it's a personal thing for me, was down in England and Wales, and so it won't be long coming here. This week, the MPs voted in favour of legalising assisted dying. Now, it's a vote of conscience as such. But what I noticed, Philip, I don't know if you did, Lloyd, so many Labour MPs putting out a 2-page letter, which was verbatim the exact same, saying, I have been thinking, and my conscience is sitting, I'm going to be supporting the government bill, or this bill rather. And I'm looking at it going, as a cynic, going, you've all been told by the whips, and this is what you've been told to justify the vote that they need, because obviously the cabinet approve of this. I personally don't. Marie, I think it's wrong. Did you notice this?
Yes, I did. I also noticed the fact that the vast majority of those who did not rebel were the new Labour intake who owe their entire kind of careers to Keir Starmer. I also noticed that when Keir Starmer was the head of the Crown Prosecution Service, he actually supported the concept of assisted dying. This is something that he personally has supported, and I think the way we saw the Labour Party vote the other day, it was very, very clear that they were all paying homage to Sir Keir Starmer, their blessed leader. It's very, very worrying to have so many people using emotional arguments about something which, you know, really should never have got any further than a chat with some of the disabled, particularly the disabled people who were outside Westminster
Crying
on that day. All they had to do was simply go and speak to those people. The real fears that exist in the disabled community over this kind of issue. What's really worrying though, Roddy, is this is eugenics. Mm-hmm. This is, you know, at the same time we see, you know, a rise of the right, supposedly. We have politicians supposedly of the left who are taking up ideas that were discredited in the 20s, the 30s, and then ultimately discredited by the way they were practiced in Nazi Germany. The whole idea that the state should not have the sanction to kill. And indeed, the whole idea that a government could instruct doctors to break their Hippocratic oath. That, you know, there are bigger things at play here. And remembering, you know, that's for England and Wales, what happened in Westminster, but the same procedure and the same idea is being put forward in the Scottish Parliament by a Liberal Democrat as a private member's bill. And again, there's all this virtue signalling. Everyone's telling stories about, you know, individuals that suffered badly. Now, the issue there is not the suffering. It's the failure of the palliative care. And surely before we consider the concept of assisted dying or state-sanctioned suicide, we should be looking and improving the provision of palliative care. Within an hour of the vote on assisted dying, there was a private member's bill put forward in the House of Commons to create funding for the hospice movement. Most of the hospice movement is funded by charity, not funded by the NHS. This is where palliative care, this is where end-of-life care is at its most focused. The Labour Party refused and rejected that proposed bill on funding hospices less than an hour after their members had voted for assisted dying. What kind of a world are we living in? The people who are in Westminster, and I would suggest a large number who are in Holyrood as well, appear to have no real connection with humanity. It's all managerial. We must do this. The boss says this. Move it forward. Move it forward. This is people's lives we're talking about here. Are these people so ill-informed that they haven't looked into the background behind all of this idea? It would appear they don't. And as a result of that, the phrase, evil things happen when good men do nothing. Well, the fact of the matter is we've got 650 of them in the Houses of Commons who appear to be very bad people indeed.
Indeed, they do. I mean, I don't know all the exact numbers with me, but the fact is, Phil, that in Canada introduced this in the first year, there was like 150 people. By year 3, it was up to 23,000 who chose assisted dying. But I wrote a tweet and I put it in my blog that accompanies this video. The back in the 30s, Lloyd alluded to it, the Germans, the Nazis introduced the Actin T4, where German physicians were authorized to select patients deemed incurably sick after most critical medical examination and then administer them to a mercy death. And we know how that went. Now, I just want to say we've made legal euthanasia in the country that gave you the Irish famine, the Scottish Holocaust of called Highland clearances, the Bengal famines when they didn't have a law. Now, maybe I'm extreme, maybe I am, but I don't trust politicians putting in a law that allows the state to have a way to kill people.
Definitely not. That's an absolute no-no. And anyone who puts that forward should be tarred and feathered, thrown out of office at the very least. And I mean, they need to be taken down. They need to be taken down. Someone who advocates that, and it's not one I've done much research in it because, quite frankly, I'm horrified at the thought that the state would have that decision. It's why, as an ex-police officer, I'm against the death penalty. Even though, as a father, I would perhaps bring it back for paedophiles, but but I know how the state and how it works and how it can be abused. So that's why I'm against the death penalty. But this type of thing, no chance. Absolutely no chance. To hell with the state deciding such things. The individual, on the other hand, may. That's a different debate. But it's a tough debate and a tough decision. Definitely improve palliative care. Hospices are... there's and the point Lloyd made is excellent because St Andrews and Airdrie do miracle work. They do... At the time in life when people are lost and losing loved ones, they do miracle work, and that needs to be supported by the government. They've got charity shops and it's subscription and people making donations, and that's not how this type of care for humanity, this human care needs to be done. However, when you look at the voting, that's how parties normally work. It takes courage to stand against the whip. And that's what we need from politicians, courage. At times to vote with your conscience. It happens, but not very often. And funny enough, two we've seen one is Kate Forbes. Now, I disagree with her as a representative for independence because she's not, in my view, as I fail to see her make any progress in this respect since she was thrust into prominence under St Nicola. But she stuck to what principles she has on this subject of I think it was gay marriage, and that I respect, the fact that she stood up for that and stood against and swum against the current and the tide. But shame she can't fight for independence with the same conviction. But then that's clearly not one of her principles, to fight for the freedom of the Scottish people and an independent Scotland. That's why I don't trust her and I don't want anywhere near the leadership. But it's another matter, I suppose. But it all comes down to principles, and too many have none. Too many politicians have none.
And before any of you start writing into me to say, oh, my granny, my auntie, my wife, my whatever, I was a carer for my wife for 2.5 years at her end of life, and every minute was precious. And so I do understand that there are pressures, but I would not have assisted her going earlier. Eva, how do you find? Were you uncomfortable when you heard this going through?
I would have felt uncomfortable anyway, because the bill is very badly written, and those who were defending or supporting it maintained that it was about getting the principle established to begin with, and the detail can be worked out later on. And I have no confidence that that's what will happen, because that is completely back to front. But what seriously got my goat in amongst this was Kim Ledbetter, who said that feeling like a burden on others could be a legitimate reason to ask for assisted suicide, with no insight, no understanding whatsoever about what it feels like to be a disabled person who at times has to ask for support from others. It's bad enough being disabled at times without feeling like you're a burden, and then some politician who should know better suggests that you are such a burden that it would be legitimate to bring your life to a premature end so as to save the others who are caring for you. I mean, words absolutely fail me. And it was another of these occasions where something was almost launched at the television screen. The United Kingdom deserves better quality politicians than we've got sitting in Westminster. Of that, there is no doubt. And the fact that Starmer is sitting there with a vast majority, many of whom, obviously, as we've said already, owe their allegiance to him and him alone, does not augur well for the future. And it simply underscores the need for Scottish independence as a matter of considerable urgency, in the hope that when Scotland is independent, we can people with stains, the people that we elect, to make sure that they do the job that we want them to do the way we want it to be done.
Correct. Alan, to you especially, you with Megan, you have a disabled grandchild there, and you know exactly how this feels. How did you feel when you heard about this? Did it make you uncomfortable, nervous?
It made me extremely scared. I mean, as you know, I used to put through quite a few motions at SNP conferences. One of the hardest ones for me to put through was the motion on complex medical needs. Because as children have a lot of services, but when they reach the age of adulthood, all those services finish. And it's because modern technology and medicines have improved so much that more of our children are living longer and they're getting into adulthood. I mean, we were told that we would be lucky if Megan got to school age. Megan was in palliative care until she was 7. And that costs a lot of money to the government. And no doubt it does cost a lot of money. But when they get to adult services, there's nothing there. And there's more and more children coming through and living into adulthood. So the government's going to have to spend a lot more money in that section. And with this bill going through, and as Lloyd said, them refusing to take the hospice funding bill, makes me wonder why.
Yeah.
It's extremely frightening. I mean, Megan is non-verbal, non-mobile, needs fed through a feeding tube, has a suction machine, has to be put on oxygen overnight, has to have oxygen after a seizure. She has many seizures which are medically resistant. But there's other children. Megan's lucky because she's got a family. There's other children, many of them, who are in foster care. Now, not because their parents were bad people, but because the parents loved them so much that they handed them over to someone else that they thought would give them a better life because they couldn't handle the situation that they were under. When that child reaches the age of adulthood, the foster carers are told, you can continue looking after this person, but you'll get no money, or we'll take them back into the state. Now, that worries me if they take them back into the state, especially when there's an assisted dying and they are non-verbal, non-mobile. What happens to them? Who looks after them? There is absolutely no safeguard in this legislation, and it has to be thrown out. I mean, luckily enough, this was only the first reading, so there's still time for this to be chucked, and it has to be chucked.
Yeah, we can but hope. I mean, I go back to one of the topics we covered earlier, and I'm thinking about when the GRA thing all kicked off. Some trans people were on saying, well, the biggest problem we have is the trans community is the lack of medical provision and the lack of money in it. Sturgeon and her crew never put the money into that. They instead went for the certificates and all the stuff that we've seen since. They still haven't put enough money in to medical services for that. But it's just, of all the things, Lloyd, we see it's going wrong, and it's we need to get out of it. That's why we call this one, it's time we need to save ourselves. Because not only that, I would like to play a video. Brendan O'Hara asked the Prime Minister in the House of Commons about the warrants. If we would now stop supplying weapons to Israel who are committing a genocide, and we've got their ex-defence minister and the Prime Minister are wanted in the highest court in the world for war crimes and crimes against humanity. And this was the question and the reply.
That arrest warrants have been issued for his allies, Netanyahu and Gallant. The Prime Minister's determination to supply Israel with the weapons it requires to carry out its atrocities in Gaza, which has always been morally repugnant, is now completely untenable. Yep. But what these warrants do is present him with a perfectly valid legal avenue by which he can end the UK's complicity in this slaughter. So will he do that? Or will the Prime Minister continue to choose to licence F-35 components to a regime which is now led by a man wanted for war crimes and crimes against humanity?
We've set out our position under the current law, as he well knows. I've set out my position very, very clearly in relation to the sale of capability to Israel to defend itself against attacks such as those from Iran. And I'm very clear that we'll continue to do so.
To defend themselves while they're slaughtering people in Lebanon and in Gaza. No one mentioned Iran there, but that's what they're about. But we, as British citizens, it's in our name, Lloyd. And as long as we're in that union, it's in our name.
Yes, that's why independence is the most important thing. As we go further into this 21st century, which seems to be repeating all the mistakes of the 20th century, it's so important, particularly for children and our future generations, that Scotland takes its place in the world, that our opinion, that our view of things is available to other people in the world, and we can only have that with independence. I think it's extraordinary listening to Keir Starmer. In any other circumstances, Keir Starmer, in the Scottish Parliament, for instance, he would have had to declare an interest before answering that question, because his brother-in-law is a colonel in the IDF. He himself has stated very clearly that he believes that he is a Zionist. He supports the Zionist ideology. And I think whenever Israel is discussed, he should declare an interest and sit down. Because effectively, what's happening in Britain at the moment is we're being dictated to by a man who is emotionally connected to the worst regime on this planet and will defend it and has defended it up until now. Well done, Brendan O'Hara, but you're really beating your head against a brick wall when you're dealing with this kind of individual. A man who believes in assisted dying, the man who believes Israel has the right to turn off the electricity, the water and the food for millions and millions of people. He's an absolute disgrace of a human being. And the only way we and future generations can avoid being tarred with this foul brush of British imperialism is by us taking our place in the United Nations as an independent country. I saw during the week wonderful scenes from the airport in Dublin when the Irish peacekeeping forces coming home for Christmas, and seeing the children, the families of these men who have been in probably one of the, apart from the Ukraine, probably the most dangerous place on the planet for the past year or so, coming home for Christmas and seeing the Irish flag on the shoulders of their uniforms. I just thought, I really love to see the day when I see soldiers coming back from a UN peacekeeping mission with a saltire on their uniform.
Yeah.
And that has to be our aim. Scotland taking its full place in the world, giving the world the benefit of what we see. And think of the contribution we make coming out of our colonial situation, our understanding, the clear understanding of what has happened to us, the exploitation of us as a people over the past hundreds of years. That will aid and improve the debate on a worldwide level, because we can tell you exactly what it's like to come from the belly of the beast that is Britain.
Here. Just something else, and all those things that Lloyd said about Starmer, his love of the Zionists and the assisted dying and everything else. Now, for the British, we're stuck in this, folks, at the moment. Have you ever seen the likes of this? A Prime Minister. You go, Phil. Have you ever seen the likes of that in your life? Does that not epitomise that they're all cheeks of the same arse?
It does. It's power in function before your eyes. These are the strings you can't see, but the strings of America are strongly connected with Trump in particular, obviously, with Nigel the reformer. The reformer, Nigel, the new kid on the block, Nigel, the man of the people. What a shyster! What a chancer! If ever there was a guy who would promise you discount on whippet tax and bird seed for pigeon fanciers and penny off the pint to keep the oiks in their place and happy, it's this complete idiot. And then you get Starmer. Also, the claws deeply dug into this clown. These guys, they don't lead. They're mouthpieces. And Lloyd nailed it earlier with this Starmer playing fast and loose with the ICC warrants. I mean, I like what Brendan did there. I think what Brendan O'Hara did, and I like Brendan. He and the likes of Joanna Cherry, Angus Brendan McNeil, and the like, decided to fight the SNP betrayal from within. And it's a valid argument that stands, because it's something that it was an argument I've talked about many times before. It delayed. What do I do? Do I stand up and shout, or do I fight from within? And especially those who are doing very well out the situation, just fought from within. And there's a temptation, you've got to say, you're making a salary. For most of these people are making a salary that they will never make again. It was easy for me to stand up because I was losing a fortune being an MP, and I couldn't say anything about it. But my criticisms of any politician who stayed within the SNP is more about the policies than the persons. And I would say I've been critical of Joanna, but it's not Joanna Cherry the person or the principled individual. I know what she's lost by getting to fight this fight and get that balance. And as a lawyer, she's very, very well positioned to make these decisions. She's a prime example of what you can do by staying within the system and fighting from within. And Brendan showed here what can be done if you stay the course and speak up from within the system. Am I comfortable with everything they're doing? No. On the general position with Starmer, UK is a signatory to the Rome. I can't remember what it was. It was anyway. We signed it Britain signed it on the 30th of November 1998 and ratified it on the 4th of October. So Starmer's exposing not just himself but the UK to prosecution. But the sad reality is that the United States will protect him as long as he's a good little dog, good little Zionist, and he does what he's told.
Here, time is against us. We're recording this on Sunday morning just before the show goes out, and if we don't quickly finish this, we're going to be late, and then the people will be complaining. So I want to roll things on this. But the other thing, what we're trying to point out here is all the things that are going wrong in Scotland with the gender stuff, with the lack of any noise, losing to the Labour Party while the independence is high, and how rotten and rank rotten the British are. But this is the big fright for me of the whole week, Eva, as well, is that Britain and France are talking about sending troops to Ukraine, putting boots on the ground, that means World War III. That means Fasley and Coalport, Beath are massive targets. That means that 2 or 3 million Scots can be wiped out in the first nuclear attack, as long as we're in the Union. Out of the Union, no. But in the Union, we could all die because of British imperialism and idiocy, stupidity, thinking they could take on the Russians.
We spoke about this earlier. I think last week we mentioned in particular that there would be British personnel used to launch the missiles that were launched from Ukraine into Russia. The Ukrainians are not on their own, far from it. So the horrible fact is there are already British troops, British military providing assistance to Ukraine. There's no doubt about that. But there's certainly, as we said before, been no vote on it in Parliament. But in effect, Britain is actually actively participating in a war. So I see this only as a slippery slope. I would imagine that there are people being or soldiers being told now to prepare themselves for going there, and they probably have a pretty short, swift timetable because the British want things to be happening before Trump takes over from Biden. Of that there can be no doubt either. So extremely dangerous, and yet another reason, if not actually the main reason, why Scotland needs to get a move on. The independence movement needs to unite and get driving towards that independent destination before we are all blown up or burnt to a frazzle.
Yeah, and that's the fact. We are in danger from British imperialism and arrogance. The very fact that they think they could go. I mean, they were chased out of Iraq, they were chased out of Afghanistan, they were defeated by the Irish Republican Army, and they think they can go and take on the 2 million Russian army. Are they insane? That was rhetorical, by the way.
They are mental. I mean, for years, we've been ripped off by Westminster. We've been treated like crap, our people from Westminster Parliament. They took us out of Europe against our will, and they're now going to try and get us into World War III against our will. That's what your better together meant. We have no choice. You're cannon fodder yet again. But I speak solely to the Scottish troops that are in the British Army. Read about John McClain. Do what he did. Refuse to go and murder other innocent people in the Ukraine and Russia. Don't do the job that your British imperialists want you to do. Go and read about John McClain. See what he did.
Yep. And always remember, we're the cannon fodder, followed by the Irish and the Welsh, while the Nigels are at the back, quaffing cocktails. But all this show and everything we talk about, Lloyd, is about when they need to get out of the corrupt British Union, the idiocy of what's going on in their devolved Parliament in Westminster, in Holyrood. Now, we've talked among ourselves for a long time about what needs to get done. Going back to 2019, we're talking on here about a constitutional convention. But the SNP, although they promised it in January 20, didn't bring it forward. We've said we need it. We've said we need an independence summit. And we've not only been talking among ourselves, we've been talking to other people in the movement. And as of this Wednesday, folks, I'm going to sound like Nicola Sturgeon for the next 2 minutes. I can exclusively reveal that conversations with a amount of numerous people in the movement is taking place as a first step to reuniting the Yes movement and getting us to hell out of this union and getting independence front and centre. Are you excited as I am, Lloyd?
Yes, 10 years of waiting for a focus. We gave the SNP too long to create the unity, and I think we learned in 2021 that they're not interested in unity. And I think we still have to we still have to leave the door open to anyone and everyone who supports the concept of independence, irrespective of party and irrespective of indeed even previous behaviour. Because this is bigger than all of us. This is about a future. It's not about what happens the day after independence. It's what happens 50 years after independence that we have to build, and we have to create the basis upon which future generations can play the fullest possible part in the world, but also have the fullest possible opportunity in their own lives individually and collectively. You know, this is an extraordinary country and we're an extraordinary people, but we're only 50% of what we could be, because the other 50% of us is locked in a cupboard called the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And we need to get out the cupboard. We need to get out. We need to be part of the world. There is ingenuity in Scotland that was shown, political ingenuity, that was shown during the referendum campaign in 2014. That can be brought back again. That can be redeveloped. That can be redeployed. But what we need to do is we need to recognise that we all have to come together under the idea of independence, nothing less.
Correct.
People with money and careers and things needs to put it aside. It's not about us. It's not about this generation. It's about the future generations. You have to get that into your heads. This is not about us. To some degree, it's the same as the argument about, you know, what's the support for independence? 52%. Oh, well, that's it. It's at a level. It will never go up. That's rubbish. The fact of the matter is, when the campaign starts, that 52% becomes 54, 56, 58, and 60. And the fact of the matter is, there's a desire for independence in this country. And what people of good conscience and good mind need to do is to get together and make a plan.
And that is exactly what we're going to do with the Independence Summit. Now, we're hosting this meeting to start with, but after that, we're not out of it, but we are stepping back, and it will be the people who take it over. Because who we're doing this for, Phil, yes, as Lloyd says, the door's open to anyone and everyone, but it's more for the people that were outside St Giles Cathedral that we're putting our trust in than the people that were inside. And that's going to be our first point of contact as of Wednesday. The conversations are about uniting them and giving them a target, giving them a purpose, and showing them the way forward.
Yeah, this is a tricky one. But with the SNP currently in the hands of devolutionists, at best, and I mean that, these are gravy train troffers, the leaders, first and foremost. The parties have not delivered. The political parties in Scotland, other than unionists, they're the ones who continue the union. And sadly, the SNP's gone the same way. So if you want to be part of this, you need to shed your party colours. Like the best pubs in Coatbridge, no colours allowed, because there's trouble otherwise, you know. So that's what we need to avoid. And it takes. I mean, it's a difficult one. Finding a route to independence raises questions not unlike Ireland faced, you know, the will of the people versus what's best for the people. Tricky decisions. Who decides? Who knows best? Who leads? It has to be a people's movement. Yes, too. And there will be arguments over this. If in doubt, you know, make it yes. Make it a yes movement. Because look at the old Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael thing with Connolly, Collins, De Valera. There's Irish guys that won't go to a pub called De Valera's. You know, this is a contentious, is a tricky thing, and there's bloodshed. You know, horrifically, suicides are up in Scotland, and it's certainly partly due to the poverty and desperation and depression being on the up because the party, the SNP, has failed to deliver the independence, the only thing that can get us out to defeat the poverty that's killing our own. So, you know, there's 1 in 5 in poverty. There's bloodshed. Now we need to see what this is all about. What is the Indie Summit? You know, and there's so many people trying different moves. There has to be a conversation before the action. It has to be a yes movement. And the awakening, I think, Alex Salmond's sad early demise, I think has awoken many to what's going on. And I think even the politicians are beginning to see. I think we still need to see put to the sword, which is a terrible thing, but, you know, politically, those who prosecuted and persecuted Alex, I still think that needs to be seen to draw a line under this, not least to expose the deep, dark state that we're up against, because make no bones about it, we're up against the machine here and the man, and a price will be paid, and our current politicians are not willing to pay that price. Well, if you're not, then get off the horse. You're not welcome. You stand by the people or you die, and you die politically. And here's the big question we've all got to consider. For all the criticism I've given to certain, would I break bread with Nicola, John Swinney, Humza, Angus Robertson if it meant we get independence? Yes, I would. but it has to be under a Yes umbrella. They need to leave their parties behind and stand with the people in a reborn Yes movement, or they're just another bunch of shysters in it for themselves.
You're right. When I heard you talking there about Rangers fans won't go into Adoliver and suicides are up, I thought you were going to say it was the 11 points, but that's another story for another day. Eva, we've had long conversations, all of us here, you and I, and hours on end. But now those conversations, and there's groups everywhere we know are having conversations about we need to do something. We're actually practically going to do something. And we've been planning this for a long while, and there's lots happening.
Yeah, well, there's a really interesting item I was reading today by Jim Sillars where he refers to Alex's death and Alex's memorial service, and he says particularly, let us make Alex's death a call to duty and unity, accept the baton that he has passed. A divided movement cannot win, and that's the very point. A divided movement will never win. That's why we need unity. It's why we've spoken about it for so long. It's why we supported Alec and Colette Walker's notion of a supermajority and a vote in the constituency for one way and a vote on the list otherwise to give us that supermajority. But to drive, to make that happen, to create that possibility, people need optimism, they need hope, they need to see action. What they don't want is yet another talking shop. So I'm glad that we're acting, we're moving. There are other groups beyond ours of people who are determined and desperate to see an urgent movement towards independence, because the next Holyrood election is going to be our last realistic opportunity of Scotland regaining independence within a meaningful timescale to have meaningful and long-lasting effects. And I say that being mindful that at the foot of my page I've got inscribed independence, nothing less, and save Grangemouth. Because Grangemouth requires to be saved, it will only be saved by the efforts of the people of Scotland, because Westminster have made it plain they are not interested in the slightest. Our country is becoming deindustrialised deliberately. You saw during the week the march and the rally at Holyrood where the unions were talking about industrial vandalism, political vandalism. That's what the loss of Grangemouth will be. And events like that will continue to happen for as long as we are governed from Westminster and where we have a devolved parliament with only limited powers. So like Phil, I'll break bread with anybody that I consider to be a devoted supporter of Scottish independence. I will not break bread with those I consider not to be, and I do believe very firmly that we need truth and reconciliation. But I also believe with all my heart that the politicians who deserve to be in the political wilderness are there now. And as Alec Neil said at Winnie Ewing's memorial service, in 1,000 years, they'll still be talking about Winnie. Well, in 1,000 years from now, they'll still be talking about Alex Salmond. But my fervent hope, and has been my entire life, but more so now, more determinedly now, is that people will be able to say in just a few years, when we are a free country again, it was Alex Salmond who helped to make that happen, and his sad and unfortunate demise was turned to the good because it brought together the people, the doers, the thinkers, the movers, the shakers, those people in the country who believe in independence and for whom independence will work. And I hope that Wednesday's meeting is the first of a few that lead to the remobilisation and the success of our energised movement, because that's what Scotland needs. Scotland free, not a desert.
Correct. And just before we go into to speak to Alan, I should also tell you folks that we through Scottish Prism, our own funding, we have funded a new campaigning app called Campaigner, which will be getting released very soon. It has a GPS system in it. It has the ability to sign up people who are not on the electoral register. It allows us to, when we're walking up the street, we know who's in what house, etc., etc. That will be made available to everybody who's campaigning for independence. We're not trying to make money out of this. The last thing in our mind, we're trying to get independence out of this. More on that later. Alan, you've been involved in the discussions with us all. You two, like the rest of us, are desperate for independence. We've put a lot of planning into this, and Wednesday's a big night, the start of the first, if you like, a meeting about what we're going to do, where we're hopefully going to have a large gathering in March time of all the people interested in taking our movement forward.
Yeah, I mean, we are one of the biggest movements in Europe The problem that we have just now is we're splintered. We have so many groups, all off doing their own thing, many duplicating the work of others. So what we've got to really do is bring them all together, find out exactly what's going on so they could build the one movement. So we know exactly what everyone's doing. We'll get agreement on many things. The disagreements we could put on the back burner until after we get independence. But where we agree, that's where we've got to fight. And we've got to also build up a skills base of our movement, because there's absolutely no point of having able-bodied people who could go out leafleting and canvassing, standing on a street stall, when we've got lots of other people that could do that. When these people could actually be out on the doorsteps, speaking to people on the doorsteps and building up our support there and showing people that we are still here. We could also organise massive campaigns at any election time for by-elections to keep the yes movement alive and to really do in these unionists. So as when SNP fail, we'll have someone there fighting our corner and we will be there backing them 100%. But it's to bring everybody together, because that's the only way we are going to win independence. Forget about the political parties. It is the people's movement, and the people will win us independence.
Here, here. Now, I'm getting Techie frantically telling me, because we're getting closer to when we're meant to be going live, and if she doesn't get this recording taken and uploaded in time to all the different outlets, it'll not go out in time. So if you've been watching the show and we're a wee bit late starting, now you know why. But we are ready. We are willing to break bread with whoever we need for Scotland's independence. And to all of you and yours, keep safe till we see you, and we'll see you on the battlefront. Good night.
Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.